Welcome. My name is Billy. I am a history, travel, and maps librarian at the Seattle Central branch of the Seattle Public Library. Uh, for a description of myself, I am a white non-binary person with dark hair, wearing glasses and a blue sweater. I am so pleased to introduce Cyrene Nagakire, founder and director of the organization Disabled Hikers and author of the book Disabled Hikers Guide to Western Washington and Oregon. Welcome, Cyrene.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Would you mind describing yourself briefly?
Absolutely. So I am Saira Nagakiri. I'm a white non-binary person with long brown hair, and behind me is the Disabled Hikers logo.
Thank you. Today we also have our ASL interpreters and live captioners. Thank you so much for being here. Cyrene is here to tell us about their organization, Disabled Hikers, their advocacy work they do, and what the future looks like for people with disabilities in the outdoors. Their book is available through the Seattle Public Library in print and ebook and in bookstores everywhere. I would like to acknowledge that the Seattle Public Library occupies the traditional land of the Coast Salish peoples, specifically the territory of the Duwamish people. The Duwamish are still here, and we recognize the honor they bring to their ancient traditions while they fight for tribal recognition today. Cyrene, would you like to do a land acknowledgement?
Yes, so I live and work on native lands across the so-called United States. I primarily live in the traditional territory of the Quileute Indian Nation, which is Forks, Washington on the Olympic Peninsula.
Thank you. I have a call to action for non-Indigenous people. Make a practice of educating yourselves about the original stewards of the places you visit this spring, summer, and beyond. Learn about the living, vibrant Indigenous communities around you. I recommend the website Native Land. It is a portal for learning about Indigenous tribes, languages, and treaties overlaid on an interactive map. And you can check the links in the description of this video that will include the Library Equal Access Program, or LEAP, the Seattle Public Library's accessibility program for disabled patrons, our outdoor recreation and hiking resource page, information on the many maps you can check out or take with you on your travels, the Disabled Hikers website, Native Land, and other resources mentioned in the program. And with that, let's get started. We're really glad to have you here with us, Cyrene.
Thank you. I'm really excited to spend this time with you.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you kind of came to do this work?
Yeah, so I grew up with multiple disabilities and chronic illnesses. I've been dynamically disabled my entire life and was really not able to participate in what people considered outdoor recreation as a child. But I spent a lot of time just hanging out in my yard in Florida where I grew up and watching the birds and the bugs and the plants and just that developing that connection with the nature that surrounded me on a daily basis really gave me a sense of connection and belonging where society told me that I did not belong. So that really, held me and gave me something to kind of brace against in, times of struggle. And as I grew up and wanted to really experience more of this, and I realized that like hiking is a thing that people do. I wanted to, figure out how I could do that with my body and in my body. So I went on, a long journey of trying to figure this out for myself, and just encountering lots of obstacles and barriers along the way. And finally, fast forward a couple of decades, and finally in 2018, when I moved out to the Olympic Peninsula in Washington State, I was out, hiking one day and just encountered lots of obstacles and barriers that I hadn't found in any of the information or guides that I had read previously, and was just getting increasingly frustrated and in pain and sad about the whole experience, and finally just stopped at a waterfall and was standing there. And in that moment, just inspiration kind of struck. And I said, why don't I do something about this? And I went home and wrote up a trail guide and created a website, and Disabled Hikers was kind of born in that moment. So.
Amazing. Thank you. You published the Disabled Hiker's Guide to Western Washington and Oregon in, was it 2020, I believe, is when
Um,
it came out?
2020, oh my gosh, time.
I know, I know.
I know, 2022 is when it came out.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. So very recently then.
Mhm.
Can you, so you talked a little bit about, how you came to this work, but what was it like developing that book from that first trail guide to getting something published?
It was a real challenge for sure. It was probably one of the hardest things that I've done. I started working on the book in 2020. So it was all written over, of course, peak COVID and wildfires and, snowstorms and flooding and all of that. That was 2020 to 2022.
Mhm.
And, but on top of that, every time that I go out for a hike or start researching a trail, it takes me several hours of research for every trail to try to find the information that I need to decide if it's even something that I can do. And then, so I'm doing that, at the scale of a book, and then going out and hiking and, figuring out, what's going to fit in the book, what's accessible, what's not. So I think I probably hiked close to 150 or 200 trails throughout the region just to, find the, 50 or so for the book.
Wow. Yeah, that is a lot of work with a lot of different considerations. Um,
Mhm.
and so you also have your organization, Disabled Hikers, and the mission statement there is to build disability community and justice in the outdoors. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do there and how you accomplish those goals?
Yeah, so we are an entirely disabled-led organization, and we're very much cross-disability organized. So we really are trying to expand the conversation about disability in the outdoors and also on the whole, and really, expanding that conversation about what access means, what accessibility means, how to really bring in pieces of disability justice into this work in the outdoor space. And that's a big problem to solve, and it's not a problem that any one organization can solve.
Mhm.
So nor do I expect us to. So, but some of the specific work that we do, of course, is the trail guides. We also do group hikes and other events. We do a lot of advocacy work and working with parks and organizations and land managers to improve access. We do a lot of social media sharing and storytelling and things like that. And we're working on developing a disabled hikers network that will train more disabled leaders across the country on how to do this work in their own communities, how to open chapters, things like that.
Great. That's all fantastic. And it seems really multifaceted in terms of what the organization does. Um,
Mhm.
so you mentioned advocacy work. What does that look like in terms of partnerships you're developing? Speak a little bit more about what other maybe like organizations that aren't necessarily focused on people with disabilities or disabled folks. And what is it like working with them? And what are you excited about in the future?
Yeah, so we hear from a lot of organizations that work in the outdoor recreation space and are trying to figure out how to become more accessible and inclusive for people with disabilities. And that's again, that's a big question, right? And there's no one size fits all solution to accessibility. So when we're working with these organizations and land managers, it's really has to be a collaborative process, just like accessibility is often in itself a very collaborative process. So figuring out what accessibility looks like in their place and in their organization, and specifically what issues need to be addressed is a really important part of that process. So, and we work also with a lot of parks and land managers to address both kind of the quote unquote low hanging fruit of accessibility in parks and finding small changes that can be made to make things more accessible, to really, and also to really encourage them to provide more information about their parks and trails so that people can make those decisions for themselves. And I'm really excited. I think that there's growing interest in this, and a lot of people who are really becoming more aware of the issues and more want to get involved in solving this. But I'd be lying if I didn't say that I'm also a little like this 2023, and we're finally starting to get a little improvement. We have a long way to go. So
Yeah. Yeah. And I imagine it can be frustrating hitting barriers sometimes within those, partnerships with communities that aren't necessarily, um, you know, they they fulfill ADA requirements, but are just learning or prioritizing access needs in a more holistic way. So I'm
yeah.
glad that you guys are there to help guide that. Um, and another question, something else that I thought was really amazing about your organization is the focus on finding community. As someone who is disabled, as a disabled person, getting outside and getting into the outdoors. What kind of advice do you have, and what benefits are there for finding community as a disabled person?
Yeah, I think, for a lot of disabled and chronically ill folks, we are, so often isolated from each other for a variety of reasons, whether it's a lack of access, differences in communication, not feeling comfortable being in group spaces, so I think anytime that we can find ways to come together and build that disability community is so incredibly powerful. And it doesn't have to be this like big thing, right? Like people, I think, often think that it has to be this like super major event or undertaking or something like that. But anytime that, a couple of disabled folks come together and share that space and, help, just be in community together, that's community, right? So, for us in our group hikes, I've spoken with a lot of people who come join us, and for them, it's the first time that they've been able to, go out and be in a community in the outdoors in a way that they knew and or could at least have the expectation that their access needs would be understood, that their needs would be met, or we would, brainstorm how to meet their needs. That this would be a space where people had some basic, at least basic understanding of what it means to be disabled or chronically ill and how to be in community together. So we, like I mentioned, we are working on expanding that community so that people can have access to it everywhere. But I totally acknowledge that there is such a need and a hunger for this, and we hear from people all across the country who want to be in community with one another. So even if you can't find an organization like ours, even just reaching out to your friends or going into other like hiking groups and things like that and asking for folks who are disabled or chronically ill or neurodivergent or whatever identity that you want to gather with, and just offer to like go on a hike together and figure it out together as you go. You don't have to have all the answers ahead of time. It's really a process of trying to just figure it out.
Great, thank you. Um, and I wanted to ask as well, just kind of based on, um, feeling connected to the outdoors and to community, what do you look for in a hike or personally, and what kind of hikes do you enjoy the most?
Mhm. Yeah, so I, really tend to focus on like quote unquote shorter hikes. So, for me, like even going out for just like 2 or 3 miles can be a really fulfilling experience. But sometimes even less than that, like on my low spoons day, I may just get in the car and go out to a beautiful overlook and sit there and just enjoy the experience. So I really look for kind of those like low physically demanding places that still can allow me a sense of connection and belonging in the outdoors. And that can be at a city park or it can be out in a national park. It's really just wherever I am in that moment. So.
Mhm. And it sounds like changing your idea or people's ideas about what a hike is, in the Pacific Northwest in particular. It's a very athletic, very driven community of people outdoors that are very visible. And so a lot of times I think people have the idea that, oh, to hike, it has to be an all day thing and I have to go uphill both ways. And that I really love the idea that even just going for a walk could be considered, getting outside and finding a beautiful place to soak in nature. So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I always tell people that if you are moving some way in the outdoors and you want to call yourself a hiker, then you are a hiker.
mhm.
That's all there is to it. You don't have to be summiting mountains or, hiking way out into the backcountry to be a hiker. It's um yeah, just an appreciation of being in the outdoors and on a trail.
I love that. Yeah. So to wrap up, I wanted to ask, what do you see? And this is a big question. Answer it however you feel you kind of interpret it. But what do you see for the future of accessible travel and recreation for disabled people? And of course, hiking in particular.
Mhm. Yeah, I think we are in an interesting moment right now where there is a lot more focus on accessible travel and recreation, and people are, I would say like um, visitor associations and people in the industry are finally recognizing that this is valuable and that there's a lot of community here, a lot of possibilities, a lot of people who really want to travel and recreate. They just may not necessarily know how or where or when. So providing that information is really important. So and there's been also an increase in adaptive equipment that is becoming available. Unfortunately, a lot of it is still very expensive, but it is
Mhm.
becoming more widely available, which is really exciting for a lot of folks. And, I think it's really, this is, I don't want necessarily like something new because it's not. I mean, people have been working on accessibility in a variety of ways for decades. But it is, I think, an interesting time to really kind of just start brainstorming and like figuring this out again together. Like, what does access look like in the outdoors? How do we build this as a disability community? And, what can it look like to really break down all of these barriers, not just, your physical barriers that are listed in the ADA or whatever, but all of the social and cultural barriers that really prevent people from being able to engage in the outdoors in a meaningful way. So that's the frontier. I hate that word frontier, but that's kind of what I see on the horizon. And yeah.
Great. Thank you. Um, I wanted to wrap up with a couple of comments and provide a couple of resources that the library has to offer. So you can learn more about resources like the organization Disabled Hikers from the Seattle Public Library's Outdoor Recreation Guide, which includes a section about disability and access to the outdoors. And to prepare for your outdoor adventures, we have maps you can borrow for your travels. These maps include laminated green trails maps, and these are very detailed hiking maps of public lands. We also have road and recreation maps for fishing, boating, hiking, and sightseeing from across the country. We have federal land maps and brochures for national parks, monuments, and forests. And these maps are just a small part of the map room at the Central Library, but you don't have to visit downtown to check one out. If you're looking for a map or guide, visit www.spl.org and select Ask Us on the right-hand side of our homepage. There you can submit your request and staff will be happy to assist you in locating resources and sending them your way. I want to thank our ASL interpreters and captioners today as well. And Siren, do you have any final thoughts or anything you'd like to share with folks before we end?
Yeah, I think you mentioned we have a website, disabledhikers.com, and we're also on Instagram and Facebook, and people are welcome to reach out through there with any questions or to join the community. Yeah, we're often leading hikes and things like that. So
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This was really informative, and I'm very excited to share this with our patrons in Seattle.
yeah, thank you. Yay, libraries.
Yay! See you next time.